Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Laura Prada from the Telesur Studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the top stories from around the world, and we begin right now talking about Libya, where explosions at the funeral of a senior military commander of the so-called Libyan National Army has left 4 people dead and dozens wounded. A spokesperson for the Libyan National Army said the explosions were caused by car bombs that targeted senior military officials who were attending the burial of a former Special Forces commander in the city of Benghazi. The Libyan National Army has been engaged in fierce fighting with forces allied to the UN-recognized Government of National Unity since April, when it launched an offensive to overrun the Government of National Unity from Tripoli.
The operation was arranged in good order. The first explosion was at the beginning of the cemetery to the west of the grave. Then the last 2 explosions were on the withdrawal path or the evacuation path in the cemetery to cause the greatest damage to citizens. The second bombing was in the place where we stood. There was a parked car and it exploded. Then we went out and the third car exploded.
And Sudan's ruling military council has reportedly foiled an attempted coup, arresting at least 12 officers. According to the head of the Transitional Military Council, the coup hoped to undermine an agreement between the military and the opposition. The thwarted coup involved a number of retired officers as well as officers still in service. The Military and Democracy Coalition agreed last week on a joint sovereign council that will rule for 3 years while elections are organized. Hundreds of people in Gaza Strip have attended the funeral of a Hamas member who was killed by Israeli soldiers near the border with Israel. A statement by the Israeli Defense Forces claims that Mahmoud al-Adam was mistakenly shot by its soldiers deployed at the border. The Hamas has, however, rejected the explanation and said al-Adam was deliberately targeted. And the British government has accused Iran vessels of trying to impede a British oil tanker in the Hormuz Strait. This comes just a week after the British Navy seized an Iranian tanker off the coast of Gibraltar, claiming it was taking oil to Syria. Our correspondent in Cairo, Egypt, Nayara Tardo, has the details for us about this incident. Welcome, Nayara, tell us.
Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Zarif has rejected the British government statement where they accused Iran of trying to seize a UK oil tanker near the Strait of Hormuz. Zarif says none of the Iranian vessels allegedly trying to impede the British commercial vessel belonged to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Iranian Guard also says there were no encounters with foreign ships in the last 24 hours. The foreign minister says the UK's accusation is meant for creating tension in the Hormuz Strait. The Iranian government says they are committed to maintain security in the Hormuz Strait and reject the British government's accusations. Meanwhile, the Chinese foreign minister has called on both countries to reduce tensions, reminding them how important is the strait for the world's oil market.
Thank you, Nayara. And now we move on to other topics. Almost 4 months after cyclones Idai and Kenneth ravaged Mozambique, thousands are still struggling to rebuild their lives. The cyclones, which claimed close to 1,000 lives in Mozambique, Malawi and Zimbabwe, also caused severe damage to social and economic infrastructure such as schools, hospitals and roads. According to the United Nations, funding for the recovery program has remained below the set target, and less than 40% of pledges have been fulfilled, leaving thousands of people without support to rebuild their lives.
Because of the cyclone, we have a problem with the classrooms. Because most of the pavilions were vandalized by the cyclone, we don't have tin roofs. That's the biggest difficulty we have. We are working in sub-conditions.
The cyclone shined a lot on people's quality of life. Besides the destruction of infrastructure, the houses, the warehouse, the businesses, there was also a lot of destruction for the people who survive on fishing and agriculture.
And the South African government is deploying the military in various townships of the city of Cape Town to assist the police to combat soaring incidences of gang violence. Police Minister Becky Cele said the deployment will be for a period of 3 months, and the move comes after gang-related violence killed 13 people in the city last weekend. The city, Cape Town, has recently seen an upsurge in gang violence. According to police records, over 16,000 people have been murdered in Cape Town since January. And also in South Africa, Friends of the Cuban Society held protests in front of Parliament calling for an end to the U.S. economic, financial and blockade against Cuba. We have more for you on the following story.
Most of the protesters were not even born when Cubans shed their blood on African soil for the freedom South Africans enjoy today.
The Cubans have continued to show practical solidarity, where today, for example, there are more than 2,000 young South Africans who are studying medicine in Cuba. But the Cubans have also sent people in the areas of engineering and housing and many other areas to our country to help us build a just and equitable society.
Among those protesting are members of the South African Communist Party, the Young Communist League and Friends of Cuba Society. Protesters expressed disgust with the tightening of U.S. sanctions against Cuba.
President Trump has decided to enact Article 3 of the Helms-Burton Act, which allows American citizens to lay claim against properties that has been nationalized by the Cuban Revolution. The impact of that in terms of the economy and the livelihood of the Cubans are immense.
This month is a month of the Cubans when they get their revolution. It was July. So what we are showing now, we are showing the support of them, that since they are celebrating on the 26th of July, we are showing that we are with them all the years, because they were also with us before. They are still with us today.
The Friends of Cuba Society are planning a number of protests this month, also as a celebration of the Cuban Revolution 60 years ago. Johanna Abrams for Telesur in Cape Town.
With these demonstrations of friendship, we go to a second break here from this, a first break here from the South. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Telesur English and on my account at Laura Pitros. Stay with us. We're back with the news, and we begin in Guatemala, where social movements has demonstrated to demand the case of U.S. military forces presence in the border. What is this about? We'll find out now.
We are in front of the government offices of Huehuetenango Department, where local people are demanding the withdrawal of U.S. troops stationed at the nearby border zone. The local governor said the troops will be withdrawn at the end of July after spending 3 months in the region. However, local people are questioning whether officials will keep their promise, since according to them, the U.S. troops have been in the region for far more than 3 months, and they are building military bases. Protesters also say there are Israeli soldiers among the U.S. troops, which is a plain violation of Guatemala's sovereignty. Supposedly, these troops are men deployed in Guatemala to combat drug trafficking, But local people say that this is just an excuse to increase U.S. military presence in the region, especially to keep the flow of Central American migrants fleeing violence and poverty who are heading towards the U.S. hoping for a better future.
Thank you, Santiago. And now we move to the United States, talking about also migration, because Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency has announced they will carry out mass raids to deport migrants over the weekend. And our correspondent in Washington, Jorge Gestoso, has the details for us. Welcome, Jorge. Tell us.
Thank you. According to the New York Times, this weekend are going to start the mass deportations of migrants. It's speculated that could be about thousands of them that have already received papers of deportation and didn't leave the country. It's speculated that could be taking place in among 10 cities in the country, and they don't know exactly where they're going to place them. And the speculation is that could be in hotels that could take between at least 10 and more days to make them leave the country. And the president of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, has already warned everybody that if the representative of ICE show up to the different homes in order to request that people to leave, they need to present at least 2 types of documents, papers, and if not, they are not supposed to open the door. We get back to you now.
Thank you, Jorge. And we stay in the United States because the state of Louisiana in the United States is bracing for the impact of a tropical storm Barry formed over the Gulf of Mexico on Thursday morning. U.S. National Hurricane Center declared Barry the second named storm of the Atlantic hurricane season, with maximum sustained winds of 40 miles per hour and moving west at 5 miles per hour. Hurricane watches have been issued and a state of emergency have been declared. Over 10,000 people have been told to evacuate from along Louisiana's coast. Meanwhile, New Orleans has already been hit by immense flooding while the Mississippi River is swollen. And we move on from topic. In Ireland, farmers piled Wellington boots outside Parliament in protest against the newly struck European Union-Mercosur trade deal. The farmers are demanding the deal be revoked as they fear that their livelihoods will be undercut by cheap South American imports. Protesters expressed fear that South American beef would flood the market and undercut domestic production. Belgium, which struck the deal, said the pact with their South American bloc will save European companies more than $4 million in duties every year. Meanwhile, Ireland's Prime Minister has pledged to make an economic assessment of the deal and vote against it if it is bad for the Irish economy.
The big problem we have as farmers is the doublespeak within the EU. They have restrictions on farmers, environmental restrictions on farmers all around Europe, and we have to farm in an environmental way. And then suddenly they will do a deal with a country that absolutely flouts that.
And we stay in Europe because Bolivia and Russia signed important agreements during the official meeting between Evo Morales and President Vladimir Putin. Morales, who arrived this Thursday morning to Moscow, held talks with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. The two leaders spoke about their agreements they signed, which cover electric and nuclear power, agriculture, and lithium industry and security. Putin thanked the Bolivian leader for helping to build a multilateral political system that supports international law and defends democracy and sovereign rights of the states.
We just signed a joint declaration that underlined the very important and strategic character of the relationship between Russia and Bolivia. We expressed our strong political commitment to Bolivia's development. We placed special emphasis on economic relations, and we've agreed to expand the volume of investment and trade.
President Putin also held very clear about the situation in Venezuela. Let's hear what he had to say about it.
We've talked about the situation in Venezuela, and we made clear that for us, interference in Venezuelan affairs is completely unacceptable. President Evo Morales shares this position, and we hope that in the talks between the Venezuelan government and the opposition, facilitated by Norway, there will be solutions that are acceptable to all Venezuelans and which allow for a normalization of the situation.
With this information, we make a short break, and when we are back, we talk about Latin American news. Stay with us. Back with the news, and in fact we come with the Latin American and Caribbean news. In Ecuador, the indigenous Guarani people have defeated the government in a court of appeals, blocking the sale of 180,000 hectares of Amazon rainforest for oil drilling. This comes after Ecuador's Environment Ministry appealed a court decision in the Pastaza region that ruled in favor of the Guaranis. In April, the court of Puyo ruled that the government had violated the community's rights when it sought to drill for oil on their land. And now we talk about Venezuela, because following 3 days of talks in Barbados, Norway Minister of Foreign Affairs has announced that the Venezuelan government and the opposition are continuing negotiations, which were initiated a month ago in Oslo. A communique released on Thursday says that as part of this process, a negotiation table has been established that will work in a continuous and efficient manner to reach an agreed-upon solution within the framework of the Venezuelan constitution. This agreement also urged both parties to use caution when making comments about the process and thanked the government of Barbados for its hospitality. And President Nicolas Maduro also referred to this and said that the latest phase of the talks, which took place this week in Barbados, are going very good. Let's hear what he specifically said about this process.
We can't say everything, but we must say something regarding the permanent dialogue table, because we have made commitments with the government of Norway, with the Venezuelan opposition, to take with prudence all of the issues which we hold conversations over and take care of this permanent dialogue table, which exists, which is active and functioning with the Venezuelan opposition, promoted by the desire for peace.
And our correspondent in Caracas, Adriana Sibori, has more details for us about what happened here and which were the reactions of the Venezuelan government regarding the attacks in Barbados. Let's hear the welcome. Adriana, tell us.
This new round at the negotiation table culminated on Wednesday between the government and the Venezuelan opposition. That is what was announced by the Minister of Communication through social media. I'll read precisely what it is he said. This day of the permanent dialogue table for peace ends in Barbados, a space for settling disputes through constitutional and peaceful means, successful exchange sponsored by the government of Norway. We thank the Prime Minister Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, for her hospitality. There were 3 days of closed-door negotiations, as have been the negotiations between the government and the opposition. The issues which had been announced for the first time back in May in Oslo, which is when the round of conversations began, include economic issues, the political issues, and also the electoral issue. It's been interesting with regards to the electoral issue. The government had always announced through the course of these weeks that there would be another round of negotiations, that there would be news from these conversations in order to reach stability in Venezuela. All the while, the opposition had denied these conversations and didn't say anything in regards to this issue, and at last they sat down on Monday once again. And the issues, like I mentioned, were primarily the political, the economic, and the electoral issues. There was something very interesting that happened on social media and in the daily news publications. For example, they spoke about how among the issues debated was whether or not there would be a general election by year's end, and speculation about an election the coming year, and a number of rumors spurring over what is being discussed at the dialogue table, all of which remains purely speculative.
Thank you, Adriana. And now we talk about Brazil, because a court there have ruled in favor of hundreds of families who were facing possible eviction from a camp they have been living on for more than 20 years. Our correspondent in Brazil, André Vieira, has the details for us. Welcome, André. Tell us.
Good news for campesinos here in Brazil. This Thursday, a judge of the High Court of the state of Minas Gerais, located in the country's southeast region, passed a ruling that favors 450 families that have been living in the Quilombo Campo Grande camp for 20 years as an occupation. These families are former workers or children of former workers from an old farm that was located on this piece of land. The farm owners abandoned the farm and its workers. And those workers decided 20 years ago to occupy that land on the outskirts of the city of Campo do Maio and to form the Quilombo Campo Grande camp. Since that time, they have been fighting for the right to remain on the land and to use it to produce. Today, those 450 families got a favorable decision from the court. The decision reaffirmed the right of these families to remain on the land and the camp, where they have been producing coffee, fruits, different products without using any agrochemicals or agropoisons for many years. The camp has helped to make the region more productive. The judgment is another victory for agrarian reform and the campesino struggle. And the campesino of the Quilombo Campo Grande will remain on their land and continue their production. A very important victory in this moment in which Brazil is witnessing a series of setbacks by the federal government.
Thank you, André. And also in Brazil, the lower house of Congress has voted in favor of pension reforms despite months of protests against this proposal. The House voted 379 in favor and 131 against in this first reading of President Jair Bolsonaro's key pension bill. The House will now debate amendments before a second vote. If approved, then it will move to the Senate after the congressional recess. The government says the reform is meant to save billions from the federal budget, but the opposition says it is a brutal attack on basic rights. And before we end, we want to share with you what this story from Uruguay, where July is a month of celebration for the country's African diaspora. Throughout the month, Afro-Uruguayan citizens celebrate their history, their achievements, and come together so their voices can be heard in remembrance of those who give their lives and their culture to their country. Let's find it out.
Candombe is perhaps the most important expression of Afro-Uruguayan culture, but it's hardly the only one. For the 4th year running, the Uruguayan government has declared July as the month of the African diaspora, in the hopes of promoting policies that improve matters of social inclusion, healthcare, and housing for Afro-Uruguayans.
This is a month promoted by public institutions, but it would be good to see private companies and various social sectors use this month to analyze and help improve the situation of Afro-Uruguayans.
This month will see many events centered on the lives of Afro-Uruguayan women. One of the most important events will be the launch of the Marielle Fund, named after the Afro-Brazilian human rights activist Marielle Franco. It seeks to link together many different social struggles.
The Marielle Fund hopes to link together different social struggles against racism, homophobia and xenophobia. We hope to see various social organizations come together to present projects that would, in some way, unite the fight against these various issues.
Afro-Uruguayans make up 8% of the country's population, and within the community there are often higher rates of poverty, unemployment, and lack of access to education than the wider population. Despite recent advances in these areas, things have not improved sufficiently for Afro-Uruguayans.
Living conditions nowadays have a double edge. On one side, there's been progress in relation to the past, because the poverty and unemployment rates were much higher. Nonetheless, inequality is still an issue and work needs to be done to improve the living conditions of Afro-Uruguayans.
The choice of July as the month of the African diaspora has a deeper significance, as on July 18th, Nelson Mandela International Day is already celebrated, and July 25th is the International Day of the Afro-Latin American and Caribbean woman.
Incredible story of our ancestors here in Latin America. Like this, we come to the end of this with Prepare. You can find this and much more other information on our website, terrestrialenglish.net, as you are seeing it, where you can read opinion article, watch special interviews, and find so much more other information that you will appreciate. Continue with us with Telesur, connecting the global thoughts. Until next time, thank you for watching.